our next speaker is Yamuna Ravindran from the Drawing Room in London. She's the librarian of the Drawing Room. And her talk is Redrawing the Boundaries of Research, People-Based Strategies for Widening Academic Perspectives. Thank you very much, Yamuna.
Thank you. So I'm Yamuna, and I've looked after the Library and Research Centre at Drawing Room since I helped to set it up in 2013. So I'll just tell you a bit about, Drawing Room. We're a contemporary arts gallery and library and research centre in South London, and we're dedicated to the practice of drawing in its broadest and most experimental sense. I'll try. That's okay. We have free exhibitions and talks and events. We also run a dynamic learning programme working with children and young people, as well as families and schools and adults from the local area. So I'd like to start off by playing a part of a conversation. It's a critical conversation about our programme, and it's indicative of the way that we're learning at the moment.
The process of the creation of the side of the project was kind of this model. So basically, the curator chose for artists to present their ideas to so I did it to a women's centre, and then the women from the women's centre got to choose which one they wanted. And it's like the first time I've done that model, and it was so good. Also, they paid us to do the proposals, and the whole process was amazing. And then the women get what they actually want, you know. And so the whole thing is like, I saw that in practice, and it was amazing. And it was handing over that expertise to the people that are the experts in themselves, because that's everyone.
It's that question as well of like, and I think because you have the question about like the role of institutions within communities or localities, and like the idea of that, the institution, is it a host or is it a guest?
So that last sentence that Misty says is the institution a host or a guest? So I'll come back to this conversation on different models of initiating, organising and structuring research projects, and who gets to decide. So the question of who is conducting drawing research today is closely related to the theme of this symposium. What is drawing research? Audience analysis gathered from the last few years at Drawing Room, as well as recent reflection exercises on our own structure, have led us to recognise a potentially narrow range of perspectives reflected within drawing research. So what can we do to widen academic perspectives of the world? And how can we play a part in making academic research more relevant to our local communities? Improving diversity and participation in the arts has been a long-standing aim. So this presentation isn't about anything particularly new, but since 2020, this has definitely felt more urgent. And many organisations have sort of intensified their efforts in this area. And this presentation is about Drawing Room's recent journey to keep this issue in the foreground. So I'll talk briefly on some of the self-reflection we did on our audience and our own structure, and then share lessons from some recent projects and an external project too. And that's the Art Assassins Young People's Collective at the South London Gallery. So first we reflected on who is currently engaged in the arts, our audience. So the majority who visit Drawing Room's exhibitions, events, talks and library are typically white, middle class, female and aged 40 plus. Oh, I've lost my slides. There's a Zoom that's popped up. Shall I? Oh. Oh. My slides have disappeared. A Zoom, something's popped up. I think it's just a Zoom. Something. It just popped up over the top of it.
Sure. Maybe because I was trying. Oh, there you go. You okay? I know what I can do actually. I'll just there's some people trying to get in, so I'm just going to let them in. Okay. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, not at all. No worries.
Okay, and then I'll get rid of them. Oh, I don't want to do that. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you. Oops, so just go back a bit. So the majority who visit drawing rooms, exhibitions, events, talks and library are typically white, middle class, female and aged 40 plus. This information is gathered from visitor surveys, which we are asked to carry out as part of our reporting for Arts Council funding. I should just say that the return surveys are only around 5% of total visitors, but this profile is definitely confirmed by our own interactions with our visitors to the gallery, library and events. And drawing room is by no means unique in this situation. Arts Council data from across the sector reflects a similar situation. So this document here, which is from the Let's Create Strategy 2020 to 2030, is discussing participation in the arts in general and the lack of diversity there. At research level, there is even less diversity still. So this document defines culture as collections, combined arts, dance, libraries, literature, museums, music, theatre, and the visual arts. So the art forms and organisations which Arts Council England invests in. It's very much the public-facing part of culture, but participation in arts and academia, which underwrites a fair bit of the thinking and shaping of these, isn't really touched upon in this document. Maybe it's also helpful at this point to qualify what I mean by arts academia. Here it's used as a catch-all that includes research and thinking that happens not just at universities, but also within publicly funded institutions and organisations. So researchers, curators, writers, independent scholars and educators. So basically those whose professions are substantially shaped by an arts academic experience and a relationship to academia. So after we reflected on our audience structure, we reflected on our own structure. So we said our audience is white, middle class, female and 40 plus. And there's clearly a correlation here between our audience and our staff structure. As you can see, our staff mirrors our audience, with drawing room staff over the last 20 years typically being predominantly white, middle class, female, and an average age of about 30 plus. So just a little bit younger. And extending out from our permanent staff, external exhibition curators, speakers and panelists at our events in the past have often reflected a similar lack of diversity. Also our technicians, the conservators we have worked with and others. So we began by we'd been reflecting on this information for a while and a bit more at the end of 2019 with the introduction of the learning team to drawing room, which did come out of a long-standing desire to connect with and serve our local community better and expand our audience. But a lot of the really significant reflection happened in 2020 as a response to the Black Lives Matter movement and the race conversation that was sort of happening everywhere then. What did we do to reflect? Well, we tried to inform ourselves and understand a bit better. One exercise that I'll mention is an online staff reading group, which happened online as it was still during COVID. And one crucial text we read was this text here, Women, Race and Class by Angela Davis. I'll talk about this one as an example, just because it had quite a lot of impact on our thinking about the vital importance of diverse perspectives in research. And I'll give an example. So the book traces from the late 20th century how gender, race, and class compete with each other for rights rather than work together. So it's a critique of white feminism, which Davis suggests comes out on top in this race, although she doesn't by any means suggest that the race is over or that rights for white feminism have been achieved. The book is a difficult read that doesn't shy away from the distressing ramifications of historical and structural inequality. And I'm sorry to draw such a distressing subject to mind, but one chapter that had particular impact was chapter 11 on rape, race, and the myth of the Black rapist. The chapter reviews analysis and commentary on qualitative data used by historical researchers. This is clearly coloured by prejudice and reeks of rhetoric, and it's really quite easy to spot. But there's a moment where Davis looks at Diana Russell's research for her seminal book, The Politics of Rape, The Victim's Perspective. Now, Russell was one of the first feminist writers to offer new understandings of rape and sexism in society. Davis questions some of Russell's quantitative data on page 162. And I'll just read that for you. It's a short extract. She says her book is based on a series of interviews with rape victims in the San Francisco Bay Area. Of the 22 cases she describes, 12, i.e. more than half, involve women who have been raped by Black, Chicano, or Native American Indian men. It is revealing that only 26% of the original 95 interviews she conducted involved men of color. So Angela Davis asks if this dubious process of selection doesn't evoke racism. There's a question of whether Russell is aware of what she's doing or not. We don't know. Possibly she's blind to her process. We do know the book had impact at the time. Rolling Stones magazine said the politics of rape is probably the best introduction to rape now in print. Another reviewer noted it was intended as a tool for political change. This book clearly had an impact on public and academic understandings of rape in the US and possibly policy as well. It no doubt has a lot of value, but it's complicated. Davis points out the research is likely skewed by Russell's personal experience, her whiteness, her gender, and her politics as a feminist. So we ask ourselves, what would this research have looked like if it was carried out by a young Black man, or with a young Black man, not instead of, but in collaboration with young Black men? So who does research is such an important thing. And if we don't set an intention to make sure that research is carried out by a much wider pool of people, then we are really limiting what we know. And what we think we know about the world, maybe we don't really know that much, and what we know could be wrong. And that affects all of us, regardless of our gender or race or class or anything. So we arrived at a few intentions for the organization and the Library and Research Centre, which are the questions that we saw before. And of course, these sit alongside us continuing to try to learn and understand more and asking more questions. So for our organization, making change involves both long and short-term strategies for widening the range of those who can access and produce drawing research. And we can move on to looking at a few case studies just now. I'll briefly explain a bit about each project, but then I'll play some extracts from conversations and interviews, as this is where a lot of our learning is coming from at the moment, through consultation and discussion. So as part of the learning programme, we have Rock, Paper, Scissors, which launched in 2019 and explores drawing with primary age children and local families. We work with teachers, schools, families, and local community centres. It has 5 strands: an after-school club, an in-school project, teachers' assembly, a family studio, which is an open studio over the weekend, and a holiday club, which I've just realised I've left off this slide, sorry, as well as artist forums that help us to reflect, debrief, and share learning. So I interviewed Betsy Dadd, our learning curator, to ask about what the short and long-term impact of the programme might be, and if there are any ways that RPS tries to make sure different kinds of people are involved in arts research in the future. Here's an extract.
It feels like a slightly back from when I'm thinking about it, but in terms of our kind of artist selection, we're always thinking about making sure that the groups that we work with can see themselves in the artists in a way that maybe they often can't if they were continuing with a snapshot of work in high institutions. So that is a way of making sure people feel like art is something for them, what they can do, what they aspire to be an artist. I think that's really important. I don't know if I'm going off on a slight tangent, but just with Rock, Paper, Scissors, just really wanting to open up dialogue with children so they feel heard. So I think children are very rarely asked. and to generate that opinion, and for them to feel like they can express that and feel heard. Or a lot of the kind of free drawing activities that we sort of create, or we do Charlotte at playtime, it's not about the artist led or starting with any particular starting point, it's just giving space and feeling more. You then step first on the playground floor, or then what comes out through that is so child led, but then it's validated first. We can sort of talk about it, see it, present it, or like all these ways of being come to the surface.
So there are some interesting ideas here about opening up an opportunity for young people to generate opinion and feel heard. The programme tries to transform children from consumers and regurgitators of knowledge to producers, experimenters, and original thinkers, aware of their own generative potential. Is there a way we can use some of these methods to help children, young people, and all kinds of people feel like they can inhabit research spaces in a similar way? I asked Betsy how change is made in this project. She said, breaking down barriers on who artists for is important, and a lot of work is done to make sure opportunities are carefully allocated to children who wouldn't have them otherwise. Connecting children to practicing artists is also key, as artists have a different and more experimental approach to how art is taught in schools. She said that through the multi-strand approach, they've noticed that over time, children go head first into a new strand, and somehow their inhibitions don't exist, and they've warmed up to experimental processes. It feels like there are a lot of resonances here to making research more accessible. There's a lot of work to be done in breaking down barriers on who research is for too. And connecting children directly to researchers and identifying and allocating opportunities to those who wouldn't routinely have access to them feels important. Sustained, consistent engagement with research over time could lead to confidence building and developing a voice. And we'll come back to these a little later in the Art Assassins project. Some other interesting things are happening around the RPS programme with the selection and development of workshop assistants. These are a diverse group of older young people who help with the delivery of RPS workshops and also contribute to reflection and debrief sessions. They also receive training and mentoring opportunities to develop their experience. Here's Betsy on this aspect.
But I also think that the workshop assistants, the developmental pathway for them in that role, and one of them pathway is not necessarily a kind of stepping stone for them, but that training is kind of embedded into it, and that their voice is really taken into consideration, the evaluations and debriefs. And then everybody starts forums and talks about their own creativity. So it kind of feel like that flavors that role. It's not just that in service to the artists and service to the children, but we try to connect between them and their experience out as well.
So how can we learn from this model of including young people in the delivery of research, whether that's on exhibitions, projects, or publications research? Can we position their personal experience and validate and support early research ideas to help them develop careers in the sector? Again, we'll come back to these ideas in the Art Assassins project. I actually deleted the slide, so I'm not sure why it's here. Okay. So I'd like to move on now, but really go back to where we started with the conversation extract, which is some critique of institutional practices when engaging with community and diversity. There are problematic elements with all of our projects that we are sort of constantly noting and trying to understand. But the critical conversations that have been happening have been really helpful, so I'll share some of those. So the first I'll talk about is the conversation initiated by Mira Shackley-Osborne, one of the RPS artists for the Holiday Pub. Mira questioned whether these projects were really transformative for communities or whether they served to pat the institution on the back. Lack of comprehensive training for artists, short-term projects, lack of funding were some of the critiques. But also, as we heard at the start, critiques of the selection methods, who gets the funding, this being entirely institutions and not communities, was problematic. Alternative strategies exist and experimentation needs to happen. The idea of a learning team or individual projects being the only bridge to the community, rather than relevance to our community being integral to everything we do, was questioned. Also, the problem of institutions expressing a desire to engage with local communities, but having no apparatus to do this properly on a long-term basis was raised. These points all bear thinking about in a research and education context too, where similar expressions and projects happen. The second critical body of work is artist Jessie Brennan's project for our current exhibition, Unbuild, a Site of Possibility. Jessie was commissioned over the course of several months to engage with people living nearby to facilitate the exchange of knowledge and personal experiences. This is to help shape what our building might mean in the future to those in our neighbourhood and beyond. Jessie has a socially engaged practice which grapples with the role of artists in working with communities historically excluded from the arts. She challenged our motivations. Why do we want local people to visit? What is our offer? Whose culture does drawing room reflect? How much are we prepared to change to get people to come to our gallery? For the work in the exhibition, Jessie focused on the nearby Setchell estate and became involved in the creation of a residence gardening group with whom she worked over a number of weeks in spring 2023. She used this as an opportunity to get to know people better. Jessie's work in the exhibition uses plant material from these sessions to produce 311 pieces of handmade paper in collaboration with Mandy Brannan, a papermaker. These papers will be distributed among Setchell residents at the end of the exhibition. But beyond the artwork, Jessie agitated for Drawing Room to offer our learning studio to local residents for community organised activities. She secured funding for training to improve Drawing Room's governance to become a more inclusive organisation. And she also got funding from the RCA to extend the period of a neighbourhood connections project that we have for two young local people to work with us to help us to connect to our neighbours. Each of these three acts was a critique of our current ways of working. Through Jessie's consultation, we also learned that the highest priority for our local community is opportunities for their young people. So I'd like to talk now about an external programme that does some really interesting things with young people and research. And this is the Art Assassins Youth Collective at South London Gallery. Art Assassins are a diverse group of young people aged between 16 and 21 years old. And amongst other things, they do the things on this slide. So they make friends in a creative environment, create and pitch ideas and proposals for events, learn and build event and project management skills, get an introduction to marketing and communications, explore and develop creative practices, and gain an insight into creative careers. Here is Akira Williams, an Assassins alumni, on the programme.
Something that I think I said quite regularly is that Art Assassins always gives young people the creative license to explore things that might be bigger than themselves. It's not like you're a young person, therefore you must explore youth culture, music, which typically happens with youth groups. They were like, you're a young person, so you can explore colonialism or the healthcare before the NHS existed. The archival project, I think, definitely gave us a bit of license to decide what we were ready to discuss and kind of broaden our horizons as to what we're qualified to do. And it gave me the skills to do it in the process.
So Akira spoke about two Art Assassins projects she was involved in. The first was the Peckham Experiment, about a local community hub that functioned as a health centre, not funded by the government, that was a kind of social cooperative initiative. The Assassins thought about big issues like access to healthcare, class and community, and all of these were alternatively explored through fun creative elements, as well as visits to medical and health archives and collections. The second project, the Northcote Thomas project, was a partnership with UCL and the Anthropology Department, looking at Northcote Thomas, who was a colonial anthropologist, and his archive and the way he documented Nigerian Sierra Leone in the early 20th century. Akira mentioned that this project happened in 2020 and coincided with the race conversation that was sort of radicalizing young people and the young people involved in Art Assassins. I asked her how the research part of the program actually worked. The Assassins had direct access to research anthropologists at UCL in the sessions, as well as presentations of research from the Art Assassins program leads. So researchers speaking to young people about subjects that were directly affecting them in that moment. When she joined Art Assassins, Akira had gone from being an arts and literature student at GCSE to taking sciences at A-level, physics, chemistry, maths, and Spanish, before swapping out to take geography. I asked her why she didn't choose any art subjects at A-level. She mentioned a number of reasons, but also spoke about feeling the need for the representation of women of colour in STEM subjects. I asked if she ever felt that need for representation of women of colour was also there in the academic arts. Her responses to these and other questions were so insightful, but unfortunately there isn't time to share all of that learning in this presentation. Finally, I asked her how being part of Art Assassins impacted her engagement with the arts.
That's how I got my first art job. It was actually through Art Assassins, and I've spoken to other Art Assassins as well who are now like around my age, and they said like, yeah, their first jobs were through Art Assassins, like their first, I think, first art jobs, and they're still in the art world now. So because there's kind of this alumni like community, and also Art Assassins tend to be older than, I think the range used to be 14 to 21. But Art Assassins tend to be in the 16 to like 18 range. A lot of the jobs that we would have got advertised to us would have been from the networks we were already in, like we weren't going up to search for jobs. So it was kind of like a pioneer to invite us into the world of work through art. And I wouldn't have got my job with Drawing Room or at Bolton without Art Assassins. So I'd say it's like the pretty much the only entity that has kept me in the arts for so long and like allowed me to have a career in it. And I mean, unfortunately, the art world is quite nepotistic, if that's the phrase. It's all about who you know, and I think it would be really difficult at me not having done an art degree to have access, like specifically gallery spaces, as someone competitive without having the art. So yeah.
So Akira worked at Drawing Room as a workshop assistant after Art Assassins and after taking a social science and public policy degree. And she was part of that insightful conversation with Mira Shakti Osman. So there were two other projects that I wanted to talk about today, but there isn't enough time. One is a collaboration between us and UAL Camberwell Fine Art called Drawing in Social Space. Through that, we've learned a lot about educational engagement with local communities and its possibilities and pitfalls. Another project is a project at UCL Department of Neuroscience, in which an interdisciplinary team of artists, social scientists, neuropsychologists, and people living with or affected by rare dementias have been working together. They've been developing a line drawing methodology to better understand experiences of rare dementia diagnosis and support. We've been working with this mix of scientists and people from the dementia community to disseminate this research to our audience and local community, recognizing the impact that this has on everyone across society. So I'll just conclude by saying the research and learning from the projects that I've discussed very briefly are feeding into the planning of our future program, some of which is listed on this slide here. We're increasingly concerned with making research practices rather than just research more accessible to a broader range of people, with the intention of getting more diverse people involved in research. It's hoped that through a wide network of coordinated endeavours, it may be possible to change the demographic landscape of drawing research and widen what drawing research is. So I actually changed out my slides, so I think I've got an earlier version on here. But sometimes it's helpful just to take one point away from a presentation. So I just had a couple of summary points which I can't remember, and it's the wrong side, so I'll just leave it there and just say yeah, here's my contact. Thank you very much for the editors, for inviting me to speak, and thank you for your attention.